Hey, my name is Bill Ferriter, and it's time for another 2-minute team tip. So I had a question the other day from a participant, and they said, what's your best tips for analyzing student assessment data? And I actually have two for you. So the first tip is an idea that I borrowed from a friend and colleague named Michelle Marilla. And what she said is that oftentimes when we're analyzing assessment data, we want to bring like data tables and look at percentages and numbers. And she argued that if your team isn't strong in the trust department, that can be a dangerous trap. Because when we're looking at percentages and numbers, one of two things happen. Either we naturally begin comparing our results to the results of other teachers on our team, and we think that means good teacher, bad teacher. Or we work incredibly hard at improving student learning, and then we look at our results and we see that there's been a very small percentage gain, which then leaves us convinced that maybe all that hard work wasn't worth it. So what Michelle says is when you're looking at data, stop thinking about it in terms of spreadsheets and numbers, especially if you're new to the process, and start thinking about it in terms of student work products. So what if every teacher brought 4 papers to the table, one that represented work that was far from proficient, one that represented work that was close to proficient, one that represented work that was proficient, and one that represented work that was advanced. If you brought work samples to the table, each teacher comes with the same material, right? We each have 4 work samples to look at. So there isn't any way to compare us from teacher to teacher, which helps to avoid the vulnerability that comes from looking at student learning data. If you aren't a team with a high level of trust, when you come to the table with the same material and content, it gives you an equal playing field to stand on. I thought that was worth thinking about, right? The other thing it does is it allows you to look at student work products rather than try to evaluate whether or not the teachers did a good job while they were teaching, right? The student work products becomes our area of focus rather than the percentages and what those might mean. Now, I like to take Michelle's idea and pair it with an idea that I got from a friend named Sarah Schul. What Sarah says is that when you analyze student learning data, you ought to break your data down, break your work samples down into the same 4 piles that Michelle recommends. So you want a group of work samples that are far from proficient, a group that are close to proficient, a group that are proficient, a group that are advanced. And once you do that, Sarah suggests that you analyze the work samples and that you look for some very specific things. Now, what kinds of things are we looking for in the student work samples? Well, we're looking for what common understandings the students within that set of work samples have. What do they know? Because even students that are far from proficient know some things, and if we can identify what those are, it gives us an opportunity to build our intervention plan around student strengths. Sarah also says we should be looking for common misunderstandings. What are the knowledge gaps that are getting in the way of student mastery? And you want to look at that in each of your 4 piles. So what are the common misunderstandings in the far from proficient pile? What are the common misunderstandings in the close to proficient pile? What are the common misunderstandings in the proficient pile? And again, are there any common misunderstandings in the advanced pile? Last but not least, Sarah suggests we should be looking for common errors. What are the common mistakes that kids are making? And then what can we learn from those mistakes? Why are they happening? When a team looks at those things by examining work samples, they should generate a simple bulleted list of the things that they notice. And are we seeing those same patterns across all of our classrooms? Notice that we didn't overcomplicate it. The list is a relatively simple list. We're not looking for every single mistake that a kid has made inside of our data table. We're just looking for the common things so that we can know how to act and to intervene. Now, to me, that green column is the single most important column when it comes to analyzing data. Because if you don't have the answer to those questions, how do you plan an intervention that's meaningful? It's only after we understand that green column that we can really come up with an intervention plan. And I actually think that's a mistake we make as teachers all the time, is we haven't thought carefully enough about what sorts of things we're trying to intervene around before we hop straight into interventions. We know we're supposed to intervene. We're open to the idea of intervening. We're just not thinking carefully about what exactly we should be doing with our students during the intervention time. And you get that information by thinking about the patterns you're seeing in students' responses. Only after that can you plan the intervention activity that you'll use for each of those 4 groups. Now, I want to be really clear. When my team was intervening, we had a separate strategy plan for each of those 4 groups of students. When my team was planning, we actually shared students. So a different teacher was delivering a different type of intervention to kids. But you could do this within your own classroom. It's not as effective and it's not as efficient, but these could be 4 different station activities. The other thing I want you to know is the only students that were guaranteed a new lesson from me were the students who were in the far from proficient category. Those kids were going to come to me and I was going to reteach because obviously the way that I taught the first time didn't work at all for those kids. They're going to need more and different instruction from me. All of the other students I might stop in on, and I might work with those students individually if I have the time, but I'm not guaranteeing it. They may be doing independent work at their stations simply because I can't always meet with every group of kids during intervention time. Does this all make sense to you? So my 2 best tips for analyzing data are, first, if you're new to analyzing data, quit looking at tables and spreadsheets and data because it becomes really simple to either assume we're looking at good teacher, bad teacher, or to get let down because we worked hard and didn't see much change in our results. The second tip is sort your student work samples into 4 groups, right? You're far from proficient, proficient, or close to proficient, proficient, and advanced students. Once you've done that, examine the work samples within those individual groups and look for common understandings, common misunderstandings, and common errors. Only after doing the thinking around the common misunderstandings and patterns we see and planning an intervention, only after that should we be talking about students who need specific interventions. See, my team always got that in reverse. We would talk about the students who needed intervention. We would plan intervention groups before we ever did any of the thinking around what are we going to do with those interventions in those intervention groups and why do those interventions make sense based on the patterns that we see in student responses. Why did we do that? Well, because really what teachers want to know is, who do I need to have in my intervention groups tomorrow? My suggestion is you got to think about what sorts of interventions you need before you ever talk about kids. It is okay to talk about kids. You eventually need to get there. But if we start there, we might not have the rest of the conversation, which will make your intervention less effective. Hey, listen, I hope this all made sense to you in some way. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, right? Shoot me an email, leave me a comment. I'd be happy to help. Sorry this is longer than 2 minutes, but I think those ideas are worth paying attention to. All right, see you again soon.